Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about the craft of food styling. But rather than focus on a single project, we're going to share examples from across film and television. I've got two guests here to share their expertise. First, Christine Tobin. Your credits as a food stylist include Little Women, Julia, and the Holdovers. Welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Glad to have you. I'm also excited to welcome your fellow food stylist, Melissa McSorley, whose credits include Chef, Mad Men, and numerous projects set in the Star Wars universe. Thanks for joining, Melissa.
Thanks for having me. And hi, Christine. Nice to see you.
Hello.
This is going to be a fun conversation. Listeners, because we're going to touch on multiple projects, we'll endeavor to avoid specific plot spoilers today, but do keep your ears open. If we stumble into something, we'll preface it with a spoiler alert. But before we get into specific projects, to set the table, if I can make that pun, talk to me about how food styling fits into the set organizational chart.
Typically, food styling, at least the way we do it here on the West Coast, and I guess we can make the differentiation that Christine may do things differently because she's on the East Coast and there are differences. Food styling usually falls under the property department. And depending on the project I'm working on, something like This Is Us, and it's a basic breakfast or lunch or dinner, that falls all under the prop master, and he sort of gives me my direction. Oftentimes I get hired, though, by the production designer or even a director that's worked with me before. When food is really integrated into the storyline. So on a movie like Chef, I was interviewed all the way to the top before I got that food styling job. A couple seasons ago, I did a show called The Brother's Son and interacted mostly with like the director and the writer. So even though we fall under the prop department, I tend to take direction from many different sources depending on what the project is.
It's the same here in New England. And I love that. I love bouncing, having guidance from a prop master, but then also being able to get in the stew a bit more with, writers, directors, coaching, talent, sometimes costume and hair even, depending if there's something that's needing to be collaborated on, but very much the same.
Now, does that ever prove to be a challenge where, again, I could see a director bringing someone in, but, we interview a lot of property masters on this show, and they like to be masters of the domain. And if actors are touching food, certainly they see that as under their umbrella. But of course, you're also bringing an expertise that presumably they don't have in their own portfolio if you're going to be there to help.
Definitely. It seems to be a collaboration. I work with some great prop masters that almost always will look to me, especially when it's training talent or picking equipment. And the last couple I've worked on is actually working with writers who had written something that either didn't make sense or didn't flow well within the scene. And so then explaining that to them what the real process would be, and then coming up with something that worked, that was super, super visual and still told the story, but in a correct way.
Mm-hmm. A lot has to come into place sometimes with choreography too, in tight spaces or kitchen scenes or restaurant scenes. Yeah, it's great to be part of the property department, but I think in my experience, once the presence is made and you're there, you get sort of pulled in and invited to sort of share like your restaurant and all the things that you bring to the table that maybe someone in the prop umbrella doesn't have besides you.
Well, talk to me about how each of you got started in this work. Melissa, why don't you kick us off?
Boy, mine is a very long and winding career, from taking culinary classes while I was working at an electrical engineering firm to then leaving the electrical engineering firm and working at an ad agency where I worked my way up and oversaw production. And in the course of that, saw many food stylists along the way and realized, I could actually do that too. And I'm going very quickly through this to deciding to leave the advertising agency, but thankfully had made many contacts throughout the production world, including being married to a prop master who hired all his own food stylists, to deciding to leave the agency to work on my work-life balance because I had a couple small children at the time. And so food styling was a nice thing for me to sort of get started with, because most of my projects, especially in the beginning when you're getting started, you work for 2, 3, maybe 4 days, and then you have a few days off. And so that sort of worked with my be a mom schedule back in the day.
Christine, how about yourself?
Geez. So I went to art school. So my training is in fine arts, and worked independently as a gallery artist. And to support that, I worked in restaurants since age of 17 to pay my way through school and education and rent and all that. So it wasn't until I was probably, and I've always followed my stomach, wherever I've gone, and I come from a big cooking family. And I was 30 when I was at Oleana in Cambridge under Chef Honor Sortune. And it was with her first cookbook, Spice, that I got introduced to being a food stylist. Is a very hard niche, especially, and this is with editorial work, that then led me into advertising work, that then led me into motion work. But it's just, it is, and still is a pretty tough niche to get into professionally. I think nowadays with Instagram and other social vehicles, it sort of has changed quite a bit than when I started a long time ago. And then fast forward to maybe 10 years after that, I got the call to do my first film. And so that's 14 years ago. So I've been now primarily working on major motion pictures. And I still do editorial work with cookbooks, especially. I love doing cookbooks and television, like cooking shows and such that are here. And I could just keep chefing. So I sort of have a mixed bag of all sorts of culinary things being led by my art training.
I feel like I am more aware of food playing a role in film and television over the last, call it 5 or 10 years than longer ago. You ladies let me know, is that just because I'm paying more attention, or has the craft grown and been getting more attention from the film industry itself? Has there been an evolution in the business?
I think there's more attention starting with the writing of these stories and the scripts, and having food being brought in as a powerful tool in the storytelling. And because certain scenes might have that need, then they call someone like us to come in and support that part of the day and scene. It's interesting to see food become more and more sort of pornographic in some senses, like when it's seen on film, and the lusciousness, and like, hints of like Food Network and Instagram and all these visual inspirations, I think really sort of like beefs up some of these moments that our food is included in. But I prefer, well, I shouldn't say I prefer, I appreciate both, but I love when food quietly is just part of a scene that feels natural, especially with period correct, stories and places, and helps tell a character's story that doesn't need to be like a punch in the face. But I feel like it's been busier, and that's really exciting. And it's exciting because more and more people have been approached. Well, I'm sure Melissa knows, has this as well, but like there's such a heightened awareness of it. And also our craft is a small craft, and is growing and growing, and more people are wanting to get into it. So it's just interesting then, not only are we seeing more of it, but also there's more people that want to do what we do on film sets. So it's an interesting time for sure.
Definitely. I will also sort of chime in with, I think that people are more aware of food now than maybe 5 or 6 years ago, like you were talking about, just because of the proliferation of things like Food Network and all of these different channels that are featuring cooking shows and wanting to integrate that in. I agree with Christine. I loved doing something like Mad Men, where the food helped set the scene. It was organic in what it was because it was the food of the period, but it really wasn't the focus per se of the scene. Now moving forward to, things like Julia, where it was a cooking show, and now we get to highlight it because not only is this really important and interesting to people currently, technology is changing and methods of filming and what people want to see. And so I think it's great for food stylists, especially those of us that are more established and get these calls. We really get to do these fabulous, projects where our work is finally featured, because for years and years and years, I used to talk about how much money I made for things that were never ever seen. And now I would say a much wider portion of my work is seen than in the past.
It's amazing that sometimes the camera will go right over it's also the camera is starting to pay more attention to the food, we could show up and have a beautiful feast and sometimes the camera doesn't even kiss it. But in the last 5-10 years, it seems like it's expected for the camera to kiss it. You have to get in there and you have to either being part of this. I mean, many of the times, although we're part of the prop department, I don't know if with you, Melissa, I shouldn't assume so, but I work super close with the set decorating department also because and I'm sort of like in between these two departments executing food for camera, so that the prop might just be like a canopy, or something, but really the rest of the whole room is completely pimped out with beautiful food. So, and that's a part of also teaching people who want to get in or sharing with people who want to do this craft is it's not just this minuscule little thing that is in front of a camera as a hero beauty shot. It's also filling out rooms that you're responsible for. So there's a lot of layers to, that changes and evolves from show to show or scene to scene within a show.
No, definitely. I agree with that. I work as much with the set decorator or even the buyers. In that case, finding out what kind of dishes do you have for me? I mean, a classic example would be a wedding. Maybe there's a focus on the bride and groom, obviously, and what's in front of them, and maybe there's a gag or a specific thing that needs to be eaten. But there's 200 backgrounds, sitting there that need plates in front of them, and there's all of these, waiters and bussers and even bartenders that need action also, or maybe there's a buffet or whatever it is they've planned. So yes, we have to communicate with lots of different departments, and as you mentioned, it could be with hair or makeup because they're squishing that piece of cake in a bride and groom's face, and we just need to give them the icing so that when the cake comes away, there's a little on their face. So we do get to interact with a lot of different great departments. It's very collaborative.
I'm going to have you guys talk about some specific projects. Now, with all the credits you both have earned, I thought it would be fun to organize this chronologically. Let's start with projects that focus on the past. Talk to me about some specific challenge you guys have faced on, say, historical dramas or movies or television shows dealing with the past.
I'll jump in there. The hardest one when I get this question, I did a show called The Alienist, and it was set in the 1890s in New York, but we shot it in Budapest. So there was a lot of challenges going on with that. And I was brought over because the food stylists were there, weren't familiar with American food to start with. Then to try to do the research on what the food had been back then, it turned out easier to bring me over. But some of the challenges I encountered there were that meat is cut differently there than here. It was cut differently historically than what it is now. And meat just being one of many examples. So sometimes even just sourcing the basic ingredients you need, because things were different at turn of the century, and now I'm in a different country trying to replicate what we did here. And I had to convert everything in my head, and Americans, or at least maybe it's just my age, we weren't really taught the metric system. So even converting I spent a lot of time converting things for people there from, grams.
I'm so glad that you had that experience. There's nothing like taking the work that we do to another part of the globe, but then being confronted with some of these obstacles. We were shooting in France, and I explained what the dish was, and we needed ducks and all this, and out comes, the box, and I open it up and I pull the duck from the neck, the feet, everything is just, and we're like, looks like we're gonna butcher.
And what show was that, Christine, when you were in France?
Julia. Yeah. But I mean, it's just like, those are like, Susan Spungen said to me, and she was the person that I first worked with on my first film, Labor Day. And she's like, always expect the unexpected. And so it's like, that's just how we have to lead when we're on set, no matter where we are. But, as far as period, I love doing period pieces and the research that goes into it. I love looking at not just the cooking of the time, the geographical, history of the time, but also looking at art from the time. I used a lot of artists and catalogs from working on Little Women. And I use that more specifically from 1868 for when the book was written. And so, I don't know, there's just so much information, and thank goodness for the internet, that we can mix research so much easier, that we could put a few words in and then get, a plethora of information that we can make beautiful mood boards and design menus from, and then be in front of people in meetings and speak with like true knowledge, because it's out there. And we're showing a piece of history in our small way.
And I think it's also fun in some of the things that we do. You've done it like a lot of period things like I have, and you might look at a recipe that's coming from turn of the century or earlier. Tomato's not necessarily a tomato. Today they're great, big, huge, beautiful, softball sized things, and they weren't back then. And I think that's some of the things that go along with the experience that Christine and I have, is these things are now so ingrained in us, how food was different back then, and knowing how to pick produce and even portion size.
Yeah. I mean, flour was different. You could do a big baking piece, and flour is very different. Sugar's granulated differently. Things behave totally wonky sometimes, and that's where the time for prep before scenes is really important, to test recipes. Show and tells are important, so you could show what is to arrive the day of and promise however many it is that they tell you that we need to cook off. But that's all part of the research, and thank you for bringing it up, because it's so right on.
Well, and then doing my homework to watch Julia, since it was one of your projects. It reminded me something that I haven't had to do recently, but I saw that you had to do. And I bet people don't even realize that when a mistake happens on camera purposely, like a souffle that falls, that's almost harder than doing the real thing. We know how to do it right, but now we have to repeat a fail. Mm-hmm. And so when I was watching some of the things, I'm like, oh my God, I bet that was harder for Christine than the actual final beautiful dish.
It's always, or so it's like, it doesn't have to look that pretty of something, like it could be whatever it is. Like, this isn't supposed to be a beautiful feast. And so you have to make things look terrible, whatever. It's harder to make food look terrible than it does to make something look beautiful. And that's just because we're putting in front of people, and we want people, you feast with your eyes before your stomach. And so that's just how it's ingrained in us. And that took a lot of testing, all of that work. And luckily on that stage, I had built a kitchen, an actual like semi-industrial kitchen that is a complete, at least here, a complete rarity. And I know I haven't shot in Los Angeles. I have no idea what your setup is, but that was a real luxury, and we needed it because we had food coming out of the kazoos every single day, multi times a day on different sets and locations. So I'm thankful to have that space and have had the time to do whatever was needed.
We have a rental house in LA for food stylists that's much like going to a prop house. And you walk in and you tell them you need commercial, 2-door reach-ins. You can get electric ovens. You can get propane ovens. And it just depends on where you're shooting and what the studio will allow, what you put together. But the last 3 or 4 really big shows that we did, I also built kitchens. You had sent me some pictures of the one that you had built for Julia. I think you're still beat in most cases, most of the ones that I've been able to put together, but most of the projects that have allowed me to build kitchens have been movies, so they've been far more temporary than going a whole season.
Yeah.
And so instead of bringing in full-size ovens, half-size ovens were sufficient big fridges. But yeah, I would say out here, I've been really lucky. I did a show in Pittsburgh. There were 3 different versions of a Christmas dinner that happened, and one of them shot for 12 days. And we needed a kitchen. And they're literally, even the catering company, equipment companies we called, couldn't give us what we wanted. So I finally called one of those rent to own places, and they absolutely allowed us, even knowing we were only going to keep it for like 3 months, all new equipment, and was able to build a kitchen. But yeah, in different markets, I don't have as much luck.
What show is that for, Melissa?
That was for Love the Coopers. So it was all about Christmas, and there was a Christmas dinner with, I want to say there were 13 people, including 2 kids, a vegan, a vegetarian, somebody who only ate meat, some no sugar people. It was a real fun one when you have that many and you're shooting that many days. And then, so there won't be a spoiler alert on this one, so I won't tell exactly what happened, but there's a reason they have to go to the hospital. And then there is a Christmas dinner at the hospital. And then there is yet another Christmas dinner that gets scaled down. So we definitely needed a kitchen, and we were shooting in a suburb of Pittsburgh, and just commercial equipment for rent wasn't something typical, nor could I find a food truck to rent either.
But I think we're finding, I mean, again, it's different, I think, probably because I know that you have your own trucks now. Is that right, Melissa?
I had my own truck for a while, and I don't anymore. Thank you, California Commission, for like aging out my diesel engine on the truck. There's always other issues in keeping things. But I'm now working with one of the catering companies out here, and he almost always has a truck that fits my need that I'm able to rent.
Yeah, awesome. Because I'm finding that I was on Good Burger. That was it. And it was funny because it was right off after we wrapped season 2 of Julia, and I showed up and they're like, well, this isn't, don't worry, it's just going to be a few burgers. It's not. And then I'm like, as soon as I landed, I had 2 days of prep. I was like, this is like a food movie, guys. Like, there's food here, there's food there. Like, there needs to be, like, where's all this coming from? And luckily, they a day later, I had a shiny truck waiting for me. But it's those things that in those first meetings that needs to be addressed. And I think it's becoming more and more aware when there is on food, like we have productions need to know, or getting more comfortable with knowing that there's going to be additional things like a truck, or renting out some equipment and putting some space aside, or renting a church, kitchen down the street or something like that. Like, it's becoming more and more friendly in accommodations, I'm finding, which I really appreciate, because sometimes we're in really like loopy locations, here, especially with wintertime, it gets really cold and we make it work. We call it camping.
And Christine and I actually sort of collaborated, though we hadn't talked about it till afterwards, on a show called The Perfect Couple, which she started fully well thinking she was going to finish back east. And then the actors and writers strike started. And by the time they finally got around to shooting a rehearsal dinner scene that was supposed to be filmed back east in either late spring or early summer, they had to finish shooting in Los Angeles. And now that I say that, is that show out?
Oh yeah, The Perfect Couple. That just dropped on Netflix. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Like we said, we won't do plot spoilers, but yeah, it's available now. I'm curious about the challenge of, for example, Melissa, what sort of continuity was set, if not in specific food and character stuff, that would have would have been an example of 2 food stylists collaborating?
Well, in this case, and production sort of filled in the middle part. If I had known it was Christine, it probably would have saved a lot of time, because we just would have called and talked. But a menu had already been established when they first started shooting before the strike, and there had been dinnerware, and there had been the location, everything had been set up. So I would have had a better idea as to what to be prepared for. And of course, this was sort of tying into, I was going to tie it into like, what kind of kitchen had you envisioned for yourself for this dinner that you were doing? Because I ended up with a food truck and 4 assistants with me in order to do it.
Yep. No, that everything was designed, everything was met upon, everything was ready. It was all, the dates were locked in, the trucks, everything was locked in. And then the phone call came, nah, it's done. So I'm glad that it landed with you. And I am so excited to see the whole thing. And it was, the majority of the film is based on Cape Cod. So it's a story based here, and I'm from there. So it was really fun to be in, familiar turf, working and visiting my mom. So anyways, yeah, that was a funny coincidence. And I'm so glad that you shared that with me when you wrapped it.
Yeah. And in between, it had actually gone and shot in England.
Yeah.
Also. So there probably was a food stylist over there that thought they were doing this also before.
I think it was a dinner scene there, or was it with you?
There was a book signing scene.
Oh, yeah.
We started talking about projects set in the present day. Are those projects simply easier to do research on when you don't have to go further back, or is there just a new set of challenges that you face?
I think they're more difficult in some ways. Or maybe I just prefer, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say prefer.
I guess there's the difference between when you're doing things that are period, and most of them then would be considered period correct, that we would need to do like period correct food. At least we have reference, and we can tell how it would have been served and what the portion size and how it would have been garnished and what would have been appropriate in the past. When you get to present day, it's whatever's in anybody's mind. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what the writer writes versus what the director decisions, what the actor's willing to eat, are all different things. So I think present day can be harder than period.
I find pulling from things like Pinterest or finding images that through their vocabulary, I'm able to sort of show them the visualization. And so it's different than being like, well, this is my finding and doing the research, where it's like, is this what you have in your mind of what is like beautiful and delicious for you? And if this is it, or this is it, then I'll deliver whatever we circle here, or whatever. It's just different. I think I just spoke in a riddle, but oh well.
And I know to take that one step further, sometimes they'll create something in a script and it sounds really good to them, but they don't actually know what the execution is. But for whatever reason, this sounds to be like the right thing. And sometimes it's things they've made up. And so there is no way to pull reference. So the only thing is to talk them into giving you an additional prep day where you can actually make what you think they are thinking. Mm-hmm. And I don't always hit that 100%. A lot of times when they see the execution, they'll ask questions and I'll say, well, you said this and this is why I did this. And then that's when you get the, oh, but what I really meant was. So that's why I think present day can be hard, because the examples don't always necessarily exist. And my drawing skills are only so good. So sometimes it's just easier to make the food.
And have them taste it, because they need to. People most of the time eat what we're preparing. They're personal chefs for the however many hours or days that they're being presented. And there's a lot of trust that is part of that too, that people have in the role of quote unquote food stylists. I mean, the stylist part of the job is like, in technical terms, it's like the last point of execution of the camera hitting the plate of food or whatever it is. But up until that point, we're wearing so many different hats. And one of those very important hats is like being someone's personal chef and like making salmon into mango, right? Like you helped me with that on Don't Look Up, things so people can actually enjoy what's in front of them, because they're being asked and expected to eat on camera. And that's, for some people, can be really daunting. They don't want to be eating all day on camera. And if they do, it's something that they can stomach and they can enjoy.
That was actually something I thought of when I was watching Julia. The camera didn't really catch it. So I was it was one of the scenes in the first season, and they're eating oysters.
Oh yeah.
And I never saw a real oyster. Did you make fake oysters? Did they eat real ones? Did the camera not catch it?
At the Union Oyster House, I think
Yeah.
it was Julia and Judith Jones sitting at the bar. No, they were eating it. But what's interesting, even with the show as robust in the character of food, it took a really long time for everyone to be on that page of understanding like the succulence of slurping an oyster, and to take the time to have that captured on film, because that was all who Julia was, and Judith Jones, like, and pretty much everyone else, like they lived for food, and every taste bud needs to be represented. And so, yeah, they were totally, everything is real. I think there was one fake thing I will say is that in the souffle, the hero souffle that we did, that didn't sync, that was, we used a Japanese cheesecake recipe and married it with Julia Child's souffle recipe. And that's what allowed it to stay firm. So that was like a little chemistry trick. But yeah, they ate like queens that day. All the lobster, all the oysters. And then you know what? Everyone else, because that's another part of it too. Like once that scene wraps, everyone's like a seagull. They come in, the director's in, other actors are in, the crew, ADs are always first at the table.
What? No, that can't be. Not us.
Yes, we love feeding you. But it's interesting, the experience I've had, and I've only been asked to make real food. I'm very, very rarely asked to make fake food. And if it is, it's like a cake or, like a stand-in foam, stage cake or something like that. So I guess it has its challenges, but just showing up as a caterer or as a restaurant owner, just making safe, fresh food over and over and over and over again.
So oysters, like I said, are one of the things that I have made a lot of that were fake. And part of the reason, and people may or may not be aware of it, but we can't harm any animal, which would include an oyster on camera. So whenever there are oyster shucking scenes, I will have to get oyster shells, and I have to prove where they were sourced from, that they were not, real, they weren't live oysters when they got to me. And I will have to make fake oysters to sit inside them, seal them, and then that's what they shuck on set. And they also taste good too, because I've made them for actors to eat that were vegan.
But you're right, because this law that went into, the Animal
Humane Society.
Thank you so much. That came into fruition here in New England during the last part of Julia, so a couple of years ago. And so Perfect Couple, similar, like what you're just saying, all of that was to be mushroom stand-in, lychee stand-in oysters, not real oysters. And we had to go back and get all the paperwork, all the license, all the paperwork. So it is interesting that things, you can't show a lobster being cooked or prepared on camera any longer. So,
and luckily on Perfect Couple, Christine did all the background work for me. So by the time all the shells got out here, they just had all their lychees in them, and we sealed them up, and that's what they shucked on camera.
And that's what they show. Yeah, we shouldn't be killing things. But it's interesting that first time that we were told on Julie was during the lobster, and we had like a lobster wrangler, and we had a special little like area on stage where they would sleep overnight with someone watching, like to make sure that nothing would happen to them, to then be on set the next day in a tank. It was fascinating. I haven't had a lobster since.
So I'm surprised it's only been a couple of years. It's been out here for a while. And I know that I did a show in New Mexico. I want to say it was about 2016. And I want to say it was called Daybreak. And there I had to make edible maggots.
Mhm.
There were also real maggots on set, and there was a maggot wrangler, and there was somebody there from the ASPCA or whatever they are to make sure that none of the maggots were killed during the filming.
Yeah.
And they had to be like where places where you would normally find a maggot, they picked up like a metal trash can and there were a bunch under there, and that's kind of what they harvested and put in a bowl. And then somebody later you see reach their hand into the bowl and eat those maggots, and then those were the ones that I made that were fake. And they took pictures of all of the fake stuff I made because on camera they did look really real.
Yeah, wild.
Daybreak is maybe a good segue for us. So when you're dealing with the future, do you have more freedom to sort of just to figure out what people are eating, or do you get into that same sort of crunch about different people's ideas about what it ought to be?
I think when you get into another universe, and I've also done Picard, and we did, and Christine and I did Don't Look Up together. A lot of what goes into food that you would see in the future or an alternate type universe, because I guess technically a Star Wars in the past, in a galaxy long, long ago, far away. I'm not sure.
Far away.
And even, like Marvel type things, you start talking about food that exists on a different type of planet. So now we have to make food that is edible for the actors, that is made with obviously food we get here, but it can't look like what we have here or be presented like what we have here, because possibly the planets they've gone to, they're like a desert planet, or they don't have water, or maybe because of the kind of planet they are, all of their food was shipped in from some other place that they had. And so there was a Disney show I did, and the kids were on an outpost on the moon, and all of the food, it could look like food that we had here, but it had to be something that could have been canned, freeze dried. It could be a grain, because all of the food at this outpost had to be shipped from over a long period of time from the Earth to the moon. So I think when you get into doing, food from either the future or an alternate universe, or wherever we are, the biggest challenge is making something that looks believable for that place, that the actor will eat. And then when you get into certain projects, sometimes the food ties into something else that has happened already, so that there's certain things that can't be in their world, or there's certain colors. I don't think this is a spoiler alert, but I worked on Star Trek Picard, and I felt like I knew Star Trek fairly well as a franchise, and I was asked to make blood bread for Romulan. And we decided what the shape and the size and all of it would be. And when I was getting ready to do the prep on it, I asked if I could get a specific Pantone of red that they were going for. And that's when I found out that Romulan blood is actually blue. And so, something that tied in that would have been important for me to know. And I guess I didn't do my research well enough. So it turned out the blood bread was blue.
And now, does someone have to eat that? And I ask because of the dyes that a lot of times people, they can have those requests as a big part of that prop.
Yeah.
But then they are having to consume it. There's like problems potentially with the dyes, with teeth and tongues and all. You want a blue cake with like dark blue icing or whatever? Sure. You want them to eat it? Great. But
little rings around their veneers, or their tongue is going to be a very specific color. They did eat the bread, but luckily it was dry enough that it really didn't do much. It also didn't impart like a crazy flavor. I was working on some projects with red cupcakes last week, and the only way to get it red enough was the icing just tasted terrible. And it just, you get enough dye, but nobody had to eat them, luckily. They just had to be very, very, very red.
I'm intrigued. I would try it.
I did eat it, and my tongue was very red when I got done.
Christine, before we start recording, you mentioned doing your homework on Boba Fett. Any specific questions you have for Melissa about what you saw on food there? Not to put you on the spot, but I think
It's like no, because I've taken notes, and I just want to refresh my brain. So what I think is so great is when we go back and we talk about food on film, and we're under props, and technically it's a prop and all this, and then it builds out into set dressing and all this other sort of dimension of the craft. And then you have this in the scene in episode 4, correct?
of Boba Fett.
I think that
A Boba Fett. And so you have this tablescape of a feast, and you have my eyes went to first is in the centerpiece, just like a savagely like torn apart platter, which looked like it was meat. And then you have this bone being dropped down into the grate of the floor to some scary growling.
it was the rancor.
But I just like, that is the perfect example of food as prop. And I want to know, is that bone and meat real? If so, what cut of beef is it? And if you were to roast everything, did you have the facilities to do that on site? Because doing large volumes, especially with meat, unless it's like grilled and you could, put it out of the space that you're shooting, can get kind of tricky. And then we could go from there. But it was almost like, I looked at it like it was, although it was on another planet, like just post-apocalyptic in a sense, because I could identify some things on the table of roots of some sort. I mean, you can rattle off the menu because but I was like,
that particular episode was shot post-COVID and pretty close post-COVID. So yes, I had a kitchen, but what was interesting is that because of the COVID rules at the time, everybody had a very specific space on stage that they had taped off for you. And then they put up these clear plastic walls because most people were inside their space and you still needed to be able to see them. For me, it made the kitchen like a fishbowl. Everybody walked by and they wanted to see what you were doing, and like, because they could smell these amazing things coming out of there. So I felt like it was weird. There was a wall, so people weren't talking to you, but they would walk up and stare through the plastic to see what you were doing. And in that particular meal, he had brought together sort of the top generals from different planets, galaxies, universes. I'm bad with that exact terminology, but there was like a pair of people from different places. And so each set of plates was geared towards what they were. So there was a character that would have eaten seafood. So there were seafood bones and part of seafood on some of those plates. There were other characters that would have eaten insects. So, and I don't remember if it got seen or not, but there was this very cool little, it was like, I don't know what it was really supposed to be, maybe like the hugest like rolling soup station or something you've ever seen. And it had this clear glass dome that rolled over the top of it. So since they were supposed to eat bugs, I decided to make that a terrarium. And in the terrarium were bugs. And then that's what was on their plate. That's when you saw the like little green leafy things. It had things. And we just sourced out different bugs that were eaten in different cultures. And I'm very fortunate in LA. I can be from Little Tokyo to Chinatown to Little Ethiopia to Olvera Street, all within 30 minutes of each other. And so I was able to pull different foods that existed to fit those characters. And then the bone that was thrown down to the rancor was actually a tomahawk. And I just got the biggest bone that I could possibly get from the butcher. And then we just left a little bit of the meat kind of close to the bone so that you wouldn't identify it as a tomahawk. And so that's what was thrown down to the rancor.
I love it.
So
I love nerding out about food. and stories. And I love, because I was also just, looking at the set dressing and looking, I saw a lot of like the goblets, and I thought, and I rewound the clip because I was looking to see, I thought I saw one was made out of wood, and then I thought, well, that would identify if there was, trees where they were, just to help identify what was happening on the plates and what was served.
There was also this, there was a great big, huge rotisserie on the side of that set. And I don't even remember what it was, but I just had to get the biggest piece of meat and lash it and make it look like it came from a different animal and was otherworldly. And I'm not sure if we actually saw that on camera though, but there were a lot of food facets to that particular scene.
Yeah, love it.
And the great thing about that show is that the resources that are available, there is an episode that had a roasted Nuna, and a Nuna doesn't look like anything here or a skeleton here that I can necessarily get. So through the manufacturing process, I was actually able to get like the skeletal structure of it, and then I was able to just use like turkey skin and stretch it over and fill the inside with turkey, and then so it was able to be eaten on camera. But luckily, they have a great a prop shop.
Absolutely. I was just on a show that is a post-apocalyptic series that I can't talk about, but similarly, like, so I was asked to make an edible rodent, and coming up with some tests, and like having a really wonderful prop master who has this, their own laboratory that they can pull out, their 3D printer in this case, and fabricate the armatures, to then work with food to adhere and spin and all this stuff, and then ultimately for it to look believable as to being this, this thing that's really something that no one would want to eat. It's pretty remarkable how much things have changed just through technology to help us do what we do, and it's still needing it to be put in someone's mouth and chewed over and for 16, 20 plus takes.
Definitely.
Well, it's eye-opening to hear again more about all the effort that goes in. Again, while sometimes our attention is drawn to the food, so many times where it's just an essential part of what's happening, like every other aspect of the filmmaking here, there's just a lot to learn. On that note, I think we're going to call it a wrap. Great having you both here.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It was so nice seeing you on camera because we usually sit on the phone. So thank you so much.
I know, and I actually purposely changed my glasses in my shirt today, or you and I would have looked alike. Because I usually wear big black glasses and a white shirt, but I know that's your look, so I changed.
The uniform.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. Find my contact info at our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all our social media, so check it out. Without giving away any spoilers, where next are we going to see your work? Christine, you go first.
Yes, so I got invited to work on The Walking Dead recently, and I'm really excited to see everyone's hard work. It was here shooting for quite a bit of time. It just recently wrapped in July, June.
Which show? Or is it the movie they're doing?
Walking Dead.
What's the project for Walking Dead? Walking Dead is like 6 things, right? Or am I?
Oh, I don't know. I see. That's why I shouldn't even be talking about it. I'm not even familiar with the franchise. What I can say, record is that it's due to the contract negotiations and strikes. It's been really slow here in New England. It's a really tough time for folks. Some folks. I'm lucky that I'm able to, along with the film work I've done all these years, like I'm able to go and perform as a chef, or I do editorial work. I have the cookbooks that I've worked on, as well as television series. I'm doing a cookbook next week, so up in Vermont. So like I'm able to fill my basket with things outside of filmmaking, although that's my greatest passion, and I really hope to hop on something soon.
I'm glad you're staying busy, Christine, but yeah, I also hope the work picks up. Melissa, what have you been working on? Where are we going to see your work next?
Well, I'm going to say, like Christine, I feel blessed for the work I've had because it has been exceptionally slow here in LA. I did 2 movies that I think I'm going to be very proud of that will be coming out later. One is called Outcome with Keanu Reeves and Cameron Diaz and Matt Bomer and many others. And then they just announced the title of the official title of the movie I finished, which is Freakier Friday, and that will be coming out next year. I don't remember the month. Also, because work is slow here, I've been doing a little bit of traveling, and I went back to the past, back to the, I don't know what you would call it, but I went back in time, and you'll see my work on the 2nd season of 1923.
It's exciting.
I'm excited to see.
Well, good luck to both of you. And this really was a lot of fun. Please come back and we can dive deeper into some of these specific projects.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you.
My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.